Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining for today's Fireside chat. My name is Shreyas Deshmukh. I welcome you all for this session with my co-host Pallavi Ade. Today's topic is Outlook for India-China Relations in 2021. Before heading to today's session, a few lines about our initiative Asian Pathfinders. I hope everybody can see my screen.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Just a second, sorry. There is some issue with the presentation. Thank you. Sorry.
I can possibly share the screen
I
share.
can. Yeah.
You can do that? It's working? Yeah.
Yes, it's working, I think.
Okay, perfect.
So
Yeah.
we have started this initiative as a knowledge sharing platform for scholars and practitioners to have a constructive dialogue. And we have two passion projects going on right now. One is the Fireside Chat, which we organize every Saturday morning 11 to 12, where we invite experts from different fields where they share their insights, and we have a informal discussion. So basically, we thought this should be an informal way to connect for PhD interested in the and way for scholars and practitioners, especially young professionals, to present and learn from their expertise. There are some upcoming fireside chat and dialogues coming up in the next month and this month as well. So the next fireside chat would be on data privacy and information governance landscape in India. We will have Advocate Puneet Basin, who will be speaking on this topic. Then we have assembly elections coming up in 2021. For that, we have a well-known political analyst, Dr. Suhas Parshikar. He will be speaking on India assembly elections and political outlook in 2021 on February 6th. And then we will be starting our ambassadorial series in the month of February, where Ambassador Dr. Ralph Fechner will be speaking on global to digital governance, Switzerland's experience. And on the occasion of International Women's Day, we will be holding the whole series of fireside chat and the dialogue in the month of March on the issues related to women-centric topics. And few community guidelines before heading to the session. Respect the views of others, but don't shy away from expressing yourself. Respect the intellectual property. Seek permission from speakers before using any content. And never post defamatory, offensive or illegal content, and never post promotional content without the permission. And you can reach out to us for any query or any information or want to connect with the speaker or moderator later. We are available on social media as well as email IDs are given here. So today's session, we have just a second. Antara Ghosal. Antara, I know Antara since last 8 years. We used to intern together at IDSA. Currently, she is a research associate at Center for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi and work on CESP Samman initiative on regional connectivity, which examines India's political, security, and economic relations with the South Asian neighborhood in the backdrop of China's growing influence in the region. Her area of research includes China-India relations, China-India-US triangle, China in South Asia, Chinese foreign policy, China's domestic development, among others. She is a graduate from Singh University, School of Public Policy and Management, located in People's Republic of China, and has been a Chinese language fellow at National Central University, Taiwan. Prior to CSEP, she has worked at Delhi Policy Group, National Maritime Foundation, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and has a list of publications in national, international peer-reviewed journals, magazines, and newspapers. Thank you, Antara, for joining us today and to moderate this session. Over to you.
Thank you, Shreyas. Hello and welcome, everyone. A very good morning to all of you. So today we have congregated to discuss on a very pertinent topic which is related to India's national security, and that is the outlook for China-India relations in 2021. So as we all know that the Galwan Valley clash of June 15th last year, where we unfortunately lost the lives of 20 Indian soldiers and an unspecified number of Chinese soldiers, has brought China-India relations at a new crossroad. Since last several months, we have been locked in a tense military standoff with China in the eastern Ladakh region, with no clear solution in sight. There have been several rounds of talks, as we know, between the representatives of governments and militaries of the two countries. And various agreements have also been reached on paper between the two sides. Little has changed on ground at the LSE since then. In fact, of late, there have been some talks in India's media circles about the possibility of a fresh round of escalation on the border after the snow melts during the summers. Further to India's concern, Beijing has recently made announcements about building a super dam on the Brahmaputra River, and there has also been news about how China is constructing new villages in the Indian territory of Arunachal Pradesh, which indicates that Arunachal Pradesh can also emerge as a new flashpoint on China-India border after Ladakh. So these developments have, of course, cast a long shadow on the prospects of China-India relations and questions with China. So to answer these questions and to explore various other facets of China-India relations, we have with us today none other than Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Kondapalli requires very little introduction. He is an authority in China studies in himself, and he has been the guide, the mentor, inspiration, supervisor to so many of the younger generation of China scholars in India. So, including myself. So, welcome, Professor Kondapalli. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today to help us understand the nitty-gritties, the complexities, and the way forward, or the future trajectory of China-India relations. So over to you, Professor Kondapalli, to take this discussion forward and to give us a brief background of the present crisis at the LSE. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Let me thank the organizers and you, Antara, for moderating the session. Very good morning to you all. I think it would be hard to predict what could happen in this year in terms of the India-China relations, because there are so many variables that could intervene in terms of their impact. Having said that, it is safe to say that the short to medium term, in about 5 to 6 months, the things would be as usual, as we have seen in the last year, which means basically the standoff at the border region. As you mentioned, Antara, there is the armed stalemate between the two. The Chinese have mobilized an estimated 60,000 troops and possibly similar numbers or even probably more by India in the western sector. And with the upper Subansiri sector coming into the focus on Sarichu River, where the Chinese have built up 101 houses closer to the line of actual control. It appears that the entire LAC then will be armed between the two sides, which means basically then we are going to see this to continue for at least a few months more in the short to medium term. So the armed stalemate is expected to continue, possibly once the snow melts somewhere in March, April, we may possibly even see a limited conflict between India and China. The 8 rounds of discussions between the core commanders and 20 meetings between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and External Affairs working mechanism on border consultation system have not yielded much results, positive results, which means the last 8th meeting was held in November, so that's about 3 months now, nearly 3 months, and the positions of China and India are becoming more clear. India has been suggesting to going back to the peace and stability situation that prevailed in April 2020. So in a way, a status quo is position till early last year, while China is suggesting to a midway approach, that is whatever that China controls and the Indian side also will have to withdraw from where it was controlling in April 2020. So the midway approach has been rejected by the Indian side, while the Chinese side rejected the April 2020 status quo position. So the twain has not met, and it doesn't appear to be meeting anytime soon, not even the 9th Corps Commander level meeting. So which means then we are expecting the things to continue in the way that we have seen in the last year, with a possibility of a limited skirmish, limited in the sense that China has been mobilizing, both India and China have been mobilizing. In the case of China, the logistics is extended from Aksu and Kashgar, where the 2 divisions have been mobilized. In addition, reinforcements came from Tibet. So the extension in logistics lines would complicate problems for China. And recently, there was a report about 10,000 troops have been withdrawn by China, possibly for acclimatization, because they do not have the high altitude military experience after the Korean War in 1950-51. So the problem related to high altitude is with the Chinese side, although they have mobilized very modern equipment and so on. Nevertheless, the Indian side can hold to the places that it has been holding, including the high altitude experience. Series of wars that India has been able to wage on Pakistan created conditions for a high altitude experience for India, including the Siachen Glacier management. So this is an advantage to India, and it is estimated that China requires an 8:1 ratio in order to successfully conclude this military engagement. But that is not possible. We have seen only 1:1 at the moment, and China's buildup is not really adequate to the extent of having a limited skirmish even with India. Secondly, India also has an advantage in terms of air-land battle concept. And in the last nearly 9 months, it has been mobilizing various forces in this region. So to that extent, it appears that the armed stalemate is expected to continue for some time to come, with possible initiatives at any of the 23 areas in the India-China border regions, which have been disputed, which have been the bone of contention between the two sides. 6 areas in Arunachal Pradesh. Sikkim has also become a problematic area since the Doklam crisis. Middle sector has 3 regions, Western sector has about 8 regions. Many of these have reduced in tensions, but nevertheless, this is also an area where we probably can see a limited skirmish if the snow melts and if there is no solution offered. China is sitting pretty because they have been constructing roads and others in what they perceive as their line of actual control in the disputed territories, which means China is sending a signal. For the first time, they are terming these as their sovereign territories, which means that the previous comment about the disputed territories has now become passé. Both on Western sector as well as on the Arunachal Pradesh sector, the foreign ministry spokesperson's comments suggested that they have now elevated this to a sovereignty area, which means military use is quite possible in the future. Remember, soon after the 18th Party Congress in 2012, Xi Jinping mentioned about core interests will not be sacrificed for developmental interests. Following from that, it is safer to say that China is going to use force in the future on these issues. So which means then we are going to live with this for the at least first half of this year. Possibly if diplomacy intervenes, if we face advantages on the border, then possibly this could be resolved in different ways. August 29th, Indian forces, the special frontier force, had gone and regained control over the Kailash ranges by gaining control over the 5 hilltops. So that's a message that India has suggested of a limited forays so which means that it is now a free-for-all between India and China. They're trying to bridge the gray areas that exist in the line of actual control. Despite the 20-odd special representative meetings, they have not been able to find a solution for the LAC clarification, but the armed forays are going to fix that issue in this year, which means we are also nearer to the LAC clarification if the areas of control will be formalized in the near future. So that's one most possible situation that could exist this year. The messages, of course, are quite stiff on both sides. The leaders, of course, have not spoken, although they have visited. Prime Minister Modi had visited Ladakh, and the army chief, the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, have been regularly visiting. But we also noticed that the Chinese defense minister's visit to Nepal and Pakistan and Indian army chief's visits to Myanmar, Nepal, and his visits to West Asia, these suggest that they also have acquired a certain stability in the border regions. And this suggests then there is a larger level preparation at the military diplomatic level. We could see possibly some changes in the near future. So that's one trend. It is safe to say in the next 5 to 6 months, quite possible. The second trend, obviously, is we are all suffering from COVID-19. The novel coronavirus erupted in Wuhan in November 2019 and spread to the rest of the world. Prior to the January 23rd lockdown in Wuhan, 5 million people have gone away from Wuhan, traveling to different destinations. And we have had 3 evacuations from Wuhan. And the first reported cases in Kerala, the 3 cases, and also in Delhi, Rajasthan, Maharashtra. We now have a huge number of COVID-19 infections. Of course, this is now getting stabilized. And also last week, there is the vaccine admission. So it looks like COVID-19 could be reduced. Its influence, negative influence, could be reduced in the near future. So it is also safer than to say the second trend, COVID-19, is expected to be the focus area for India, and vaccine diplomacy also is going to gain much attention from the powers that be. So that's a trend we are likely to see. And the third impact is on the economy. Last year, we grew at negative growth rates, and this year, the IMF estimates that India is going to grow at 8%, as against nearly 9% for China. Last year, China grew at 2.3% GDP growth rate, which is Vietnam and Myanmar also have positive growth rates from that point of view, which suggests then that the economic issues are going to be a major concern for the two sides, especially for China, as it is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. They are unlikely to escalate on the border, focus more on economic growth rate, because this also is the year of what they call as well-off society establishment, which means because of the uncertainty on the border and very unlikely situations on the border, it is expected to be a problematic area for the Chinese in experimenting anything drastic on the border, because it would have a cascading effect in terms of the political rivalries, factional struggles, if China is defeated on the border or faces many escalatory conditions. So this would have an impact not just on the 100th anniversary celebrations in July, but also on the 20th Party Congress, which is to be held next year, and for the preparation of which somewhere in April, May, there will be serious political activity in China, in the provinces and other areas. So it is safer then to say the focus will be on economic growth rate and other aspects. There is, of course, disruptions in supply chain management, technology, and so on. China would strive for enhancing the SOEs, state-owned enterprises influence, as well as the private sector. But with the Ant Group controversies and Jack Ma's disappearance, and coming up in a video recently addressing some agricultural educational activities, etc., which suggests that the focus would be again on revival of the economy in China. Likewise for India as well, in terms of its manufacturing, services, and other areas. India had also launched the Atmanirbharta campaign, so the focus would be more on these. In addition, of course, to building the strategic roads in the border areas. So the COVID-19 disruptions would have a major impact this year on both China and India. Larger issues also have a role to play. Brexit, the European Union investment deal with China, the RCEP, which India rejected in the current form. Then there is also the new Biden administration policies. We have to see how this is going to impact on the Indo-Pacific and the quadrilateral security dialogue, which has been initiated with a revival of the Malabar exercises last November. So this year we are expected to have one more Malabar exercises, including all the 4 navies of US, Japan, Australia, and India. So this is going to be the larger focus, maritime issues and so on, in the light of the situation on the border. So all of these issues are going to have a huge impact on the Asian strategic landscape in the near future. China trying to pitch in and fill up the gap left by the Trump administration in its isolationist policies. China had the BRI, but BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, has taken a beating last year with the COVID-19 as well, with social distancing norms, transportation breakdown, and others. So China is also in a kind of logjam internationally, but it could also have several initiatives, such as what it did in terms of the 3 meetings that it concluded with Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, in what has been termed as SAARC minus India, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation minus India kind of format. So this is likely to intensify in the near future of the tussle between India and China in the neighborhood, but also in the Southeast Asia and East Asia. There is the TPSA, Tibet Policy Security Act, that was passed last month on the reincarnation issue of the Dalai Lama, 15th Dalai Lama. And this is also further going to intensify, as candidate Biden once mentioned about his possible meeting with the Dalai Lama. So, which means then with the Chinese escalation of banning Pompeo and other US leaders who were involved in various initiatives last year. So we are likely to see this to continue in the near future, the tussle between US and China. Although there is also a possibility Biden may revive the G2, Brzezinski's idea of Group 2 of US and China ruling the roost, which then means possibly some constraints on India's foreign policy. Finally, there is also the likelihood of the focus on the larger issues on global commons, maritime, space, cyber, especially as India has restricted the IT apps. Over 200 apps of originating from China have been banned. So that is likely to create some tensions with China in the near future. There is the ban on investments in the infrastructure project originating from land neighbors, which basically would mean from Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, or other land neighbors. This is also going to be a friction point in the near future. India imports something like 4,000 items from China, and out of this, some 370 items are very crucial, and India is now diversifying much of its pharmaceutical essential ingredients and also building its own domestic reservoir of these products. So these 370 products are worth nearly $60 billion from China, and there is a phased way that India is trying to reduce the dependence on China. Last year, the trade has slightly reduced by about 6% to about $87 billion. India's exports to China marginally increased. No major increase, of course, which suggests we are likely to see a reduction in the overall trade dependence on China in this year. So that is also a reduction in the trade deficits between the two sides. So that's largely the picture that could emerge in this year. Of course, there are so many variables as we discussed, but I'm willing to take questions from you. Thank you.
Antara, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you, Professor, for giving us the overview of China-India relations and how it is going to pan out in the next couple of months. Being the moderator, I will take the opportunity to ask the first question. So I would like to go a little bit in the past, like, what exactly happened? What led to this crisis, because post-Doctoral, we saw a clear trend, an upward trend in India-China relations. There were like, the state, the high-level visits, there were this head of state diplomacy. So what exactly went wrong? Why are we standing where we are standing today? So that is one question. And second is, what do you think is the Chinese motivation of initiating or perpetuating the standoff as of now? Especially given the situation or the international situation that China faces itself. Some scholars argue that it is to kind of, to tie down India at the border so that it cannot focus too much on Indian Ocean or the Indo-Pacific, the US's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. But I would like to know from you, what do you think about it? What is the purpose of all this?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. We are still in the dark about the Chinese intentions because Xi Jinping did not speak about this issue. Western Theater Command in China spoke a few things, but it is still not clear. The Foreign Ministry of China made some statements basically about the
you can get it anytime.
There's some noise. Can you please put ourselves on mute?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the disruption. I just unmuted the person. Please go ahead, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so the various statements were made by the Chinese, and Dr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, mentioned in a Lowy Institute interaction about 5 reasons that could have possibly led to the Chinese movement in the Western sector. But he did not, of course, reveal those 5 reasons. But we can surmise, and I have some 16 reasons. If I have time, I would elaborate on those. One is the Chinese have mentioned about sovereignty shifting from disputed territories. Number 2, they mentioned the Ladakh Union territory as illegal, which then means that the 370 article, which has been abrogated, also comes into the picture in this regard. Home Minister Amit Shah mentioned in the parliament in August 2019 about the Aksai Chin being a disputed territory. India has claims on that. The Chinese have swooped on the Home Minister without mentioning, for instance, the 2005 Chinese official documents mentioning Arunachal Pradesh as southern Tibet, meaning thereby that it is part of Tibet, and so China has claims. And as we saw in the Upper Subansari, they have already constructed those households, which then means China is not willing to listen to the other side on the other aspects. We have also seen several Chinese statements taking a very higher ground in their responses. For instance, there was a mention about local rogue commanders having unleashed violence. This has been one that came up in one of their statements. And also suggesting Galwan always belonged to that of China. And they invoked Chou Enlai's 1959 position in this regard. The higher ground is also reflected in terms of the foreign ministry saying, and which the Chinese ambassador in New Delhi parroted out, that is the right and wrong of what happened at Galwan is known to everyone, and they put it in so many colors of the situation that happened on June 15 night. There is also the mention that China's position is just, quote unquote, in regard to the Western sector. So they have created so much of myth in relation to what happened in. Then there is also the CPEC projects, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. There is, China had invested some $42 billion out of $62 billion in CPEC, and the Daulat Beg Oldi Darbuk Shiok road, which ends in Karakoram ranges, is mentioned as a concern. by the Chinese side, although they themselves have built so many roads in Tibet and in Aksai Chin, starting with the 1957 Western Highway and others. So there is CPEC is also mentioned as one of the reasons for the Chinese concerns. There is also the Chinese have been mentioning about US-India relations strengthening as a reason for what has happened in the Western sector. And we can also surmise that since India is busy with the COVID-19 related, and China saw this as a good opportunity for them to distract the Indian side by occupying several territories in the Western sector. There is also the Chinese interlocutors mentioning about the asymmetry in power relations, that China can have an edge with its conventional strength over India, and it can do what it can in the border areas and so on. Then there is also the grouse that China sports, that India did not join the Belt and Road Initiative or the larger project of what they call as Community of Common Destiny that India rejected. So there is the teaching a lesson to India because it did not join the Belt and Road Initiative. So that is a. There are also the individual generals like General Chao Chung-chi, who played a big role in the three warfares in the Doklam crisis in 2017. Although he retired recently, replaced by another general, yet there are the ambitions of these generals, which can also be an explanation for what happened in the border areas that we saw. Then some also mentioned about the river waters as an area of concern in Galwan, in Tibet, in other areas. So resources. We can also say nationalism is also driving China in terms of its responses in Galwan. Although Chinese nationalism focused mainly on US and Japan, it is now getting, if you look at the comments in the Chinese press, we do see nationalism emerging as a factor vis-a-vis India. For instance, some Chinese mention about Manipur being part of China some time ago. And so those irredentist claims have now surfaced with the nationalism coming into the. But overall, we have seen China's assertiveness and expansion in the South China Sea. Last 2 years, the Vietnamese have been facing a lot of flack. There is also the Malaysians who have huge problems about the Chinese naval deployments. And Filipinos have been also facing flack. On Senkaku Islands, there are nearly 600 transgressions a year, compared to about 400 transgressions on the borders with India. There are 600, which generally both sides try to put it down, but increasing assertiveness of China overall is a factor that we can say led to the Galwan crisis. But you're also right that despite the two informal summit meetings in Wuhan and Chennai, we see simultaneously China planning for the situation on the border. So that's very surprising. And it seems we have not read properly the Chinese intentions because Chennai meeting took place in October 2019, and the exercises China conducted in Aksai Chin, closer to the border areas, happened in March of 2020. So you need preparations for this, you need directives from the civilian leaderships to mobilize. So we can surmise that soon after Chennai meeting, they began preparations in this. So which means that informal summit meetings that we invested heavily, the Ahmedabad meeting between Xi Jinping and Modi was about 11 hours together with them. In Wuhan, they spent 10.5 hours. In Chennai, they spent about 6 hours. All that has gone down the drain. in terms of what happened. And with the last year's Galwan incident and others, we see this stalemate continuing. So it's a huge setback to the bilateral relations. And I do not see any quick fix solution for the bilateral relations to come onto the common on normal track this year.
Right. So thank you so much. In the chat box, we see a lot of people writing to you, or a lot of people suggesting questions. So I'll next take the topic to South Asia. I see a lot of concern among people, especially in India, about China's role in South Asia, particularly in terms of countries like Nepal, Bangladesh. So what exactly is China doing in South Asia, and how does it impact us? And also the Galwan incident and the current, downward spiral in India-China ties. Is China relooking at its South Asia policy somehow? And how should India prepare for a new role of China's new role in the region?
Yes, that's a very important topic. There is an ancient strategy of China. There are 36 stratagems that China has. One of those stratagems is Hashia Okungta, which basically roughly translated as counter the big by supporting the small or cooperating with the small. So in South Asia, of course, there is huge asymmetry between India and the other South Asian countries. When you look at population, economic growth rate, or any other parameter, science and technology, there is huge asymmetry between them. So China's policy is, of course, to support the small countries in South Asia to counter the big. Of course, that's an ancient strategy. We have to find the causal linkages between the two, and not necessarily all the time they can practice such a policy. For instance, in 1996, Jiang Zemin addressed the Pakistani Senate saying that we want to develop relations with all countries in South Asia, not just with Pakistan. But we can say in 2020, 2021, the policy has changed, and the new factor is obviously the Belt and Road Initiative, which China wants to push with its investments, infrastructure, 5 connectivities, as they say, policy coordination, transportation networks, trade, renminbi internationalization, and people-to-people contacts. So those 5 connectivities they are pushing in the South Asian region as well. So we can safely say that there is a new thrust in this. Specifically in terms of Nepal, we have seen after the earthquake 5-6 years ago, the Chinese have changed their position. During the earthquake, they gave India the primary role in terms of the earthquake disaster relief mechanisms. There was an informal agreement at that time that China take a backseat while India does the disaster relief in Nepal after the earthquake. But soon later, they have revealed their agenda, and we have seen the Communist Party in Nepal having closer ties with the Chinese Communist Party. And secondly, there is increasing investments in the telecom sector, in the infrastructure projects in Nepal. We have also seen the other people-to-people contacts, Confucius Institutes, and so on. So they took a position in Nepal that they should become #1 external actor. And the Madhesi agitation and others have also contributed to the Nepalese proximity to China. Of course, there is a structural problem for Nepal as it is landlocked. They cannot supply much to Nepal, and it comes at a very high cost. For instance, Nepal imports 1 million tons of oil through India. while the Chinese promised just about 10,000 tons, which is not adequate for their energy requirements. So ultimately, Nepal will have to mend fences with India and or increase costs for itself in this regard. And fortunately, with the vaccine diplomacy, Nepal and Bangladesh have rejected the Sinovac because of its costliness and ineffectiveness. Brazilians found the Sinovac is only 50% effective. And Bangladeshis have complained that the Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, is costlier than what India can supply. India is supplying almost at free of cost. The Serum Institute mentioned 250 rupees a vial, which means while the Chinese have been selling at 8,000 to 9,000 rupees or some such costs, then the Bangladeshis also have complained about the effectiveness of this vaccine that China supplied. So it's advantage India right now because we are all suffering from COVID-19. And so there is the vaccine diplomacy had paid off in terms of Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Afghanistan. So there is a turnaround in Indian fortunes in South Asia, despite what China did in terms of SARC minus India project, or because everybody knew that the virus came from Wuhan, and we all are suffering because of this.
Yeah. So moving on, Professor. I mean, there are a lot of questions from Ravi Nair, Tanishq Saxena, Sonam Chukki, and others about India's response, So India has responded quite strongly this time, and we have responded militarily, we have responded in terms of in economic terms, we have came out with a bolder political statement by actively participating in Indo-Pacific dialogues. So what do you think, what kind of effect, what kind of impact did it have? What kind of impact, I mean, did it have the desired impact that we thought of? And if not, then what else are India's options, and how differently could we, tackle the China challenge?
Well, many of these initiatives like the Quad Indo-Pacific mobilization of the border, they don't give you quick results. These are long drawn kind of things which would take time to fructify. For instance, we had when the Trump administration put restrictions on the in terms of tariff wars with China. Many industries moved from China to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and some landed in India. The Foxconn in Pune and in Bangalore, Chennai, and other places, they have put up these manufacturing centers. So that takes time for the measures to be implemented, and so that is one which we have to see on a long-term basis. Second, of course, the fundamentals of India are very strong in terms of its consumption pattern, in terms of its growing service sector and other parameters. Manufacturing sector is also increasing. So that becomes an attractive destination. And we have seen the stock exchanges rebounding. We have seen also the foreign exchange reserves, more than $500 billion now, compared to over 300 billion before. And the FDI flow into India has also increased. So that these things take time. And ease of doing business, we have jumped some 3 times in the ladder. So things are looking positive for India on that count, which means, so this is a kind of package when you enter into these. So they will have long-term impact, number one. Number two, what else can India do in terms of the situation? Of course, India needs to protect its borders, its sovereignty areas. India needs to increase the cost for China. The Indian side rejected the RCEP because there are so many concerns that China is dumping goods in the Indian market. The investment origin clause, the justice clause have been rejected in the RCEP in its original document. So there are concerns for India, and the trade deficits are pretty high with China. We lost something like $850 billion to China in the last 1 decade in terms of trade deficits. So that's a major concern, and we have been asking China to open up its pharmaceutical and software, product market, but we have not seen. So I think the Indian position has come to a stage where we did experiment with the informal summit meetings with the assumption that relations with China should improve, but that didn't pay off well. And so we have taken a position now, which is again a middle path approach. Previously, we didn't had much contacts with the US or marginal contacts. We have increased those contacts. And this comes in the light of the Chinese themselves having good contacts with the United States. United States transferred military equipment to China in 1980s. While many Chinese commentators just mention about the Indian acquisition of military equipment and so on, they ignored that they themselves imported the Black Hawk helicopters, for instance, the Chinese deployed in Tibet, came from the US. The Super Frelons came from the French. So they have imported a lot from the Western countries. But they banned these because of the Tiananmen Square incident in 1989. The arms ban has been imposed because of the domestic situation in China. So what else that India can do? I think India needs to grow as it is growing, strengthen its conventional and nuclear deterrence capabilities, and overall deterrence postures have to be strengthened by India.
Right, sir. So Ravi Nair suggests, what about weaponizing our one China policy by leveraging Tibet and Taiwan? Sir, this question has been, in the strategic circle, doing rounds in the strategic circle for some time. What is your thoughts about it?
It's true that there is, the Chinese have raised the Kashmir issue in the United Nations Security Council 4 times. So China crossed the line on One India policy, as Sushma Swaraj mentioned to her counterpart Wang Yi in 2014 May, that the Indian policy of One China is incumbent on China following the One India policy, which basically includes on Kashmir, on Khalistan related, on Northeast related. On all these issues, the One India policy has to be abided by India if it wants the Indian acceptance of the One China policy. Now that China has crossed the line on Kashmir, now that China actively intervenes in the CPEC, especially in Gilgit and Baltistan, so the Indian side is tempted to weaponize the One China policy. However, we have not seen any statement so far, any momentum so far on countering China on the One China policy, specifically on Tibet, on Taiwan, on South China Sea, or on Senkaku Islands, or on other aspects, even on Xinjiang related aspects. There has not been any forward momentum by India. It looks like we are still discussing inside about the tweaking of the One China policy. I think number one consideration is what are we going to get by tweaking the One China policy? So that is one. Secondly, is this enough for us to do, or we focus mainly on our national interests? the Americans have the capability to tweak the One China policy, which they did by passing the Tibet Policy Support Act, by terming the situation in Xinjiang as genocide, and the Travel Act with Taiwan, also the armed patrolling in the South China Sea. So the Americans have that capacity. India, as of now, does not have the capacity to tweak the One China policy at the moment. It also depends on your capacity. You cannot have a foreign policy where you cannot experiment without having that capacity. So I think India has been conservative on tweaking the One China policy because of its own internal focus, as well as on the One India policy. So India would be looking for a kind of quid pro quo on this. And if it fails, for instance, India is now part of the United Nations as a non-permanent member in the counterterrorism and so on. So we will see, because our national interest, number one, would be in terms of counterterrorism, would be in terms of our borders, would be in terms of the One India policy broadly. So we would see what can be beneficial to India at the moment. On the other hand, we also have concerns, as the TPSA mentions, the Tibet Policy Support Act. There are concerns on the water issues, the dam construction and the river diversion projects that China is undertaking on the Yarlung Zampo. It's a concern. So we will have to negotiate with China on this, or take actions which are contrary, or probably discuss with the Tibetans on this issue, because Yarlung Zampo is in Tibet and it belongs to Tibet. So we also have to negotiate with the Tibetans on this. We have already supported the broader democracy in Asia and beyond. Prime Minister Modi's statement in Tokyo in September 2014 is an indication of that, that support to the democracy. And as the Tibetans are conducting the elections, by April they will have a new Sikyong. So India had indirectly supported that democratic experiment among the Tibetans, which stabilizes, as it stabilizes the South Asian countries, like in Nepal, like in Bangladesh, like in Bhutan, like in Sri Lanka or in Maldives. The democracy is an alternative to authoritarian regimes. So India has taken that position on promoting democracy. So it's political, but it has taken from the point of view of the people. So if you look at India's statement during the US Congress events about 2 weeks ago, that suggests that there is a larger ideological conflict also emerging between China and India on this front. Very subtle, but very prominent as well.
Right. So one last question, as we are, almost nearing the time. So just one last question about, many people are talking about resetting China-India ties. So when you say resetting, what exactly is people having in mind? Earlier we used to talk about cooperation, like cooperation and competition together. So is it now going to be only competition? Is it like our policy will be like, everybody else minus China? Is it like that? How is it going to be? So that's your word on it.
In 1951, in 1950 April, we decided to recognize the People's Republic of China. And in 1954, the Panchil Agreement was signed. And in 1976, when we restored diplomatic relations with China after the border conflict in 1962, China imposed 3 conditions on India. And those are part of the bilateral relations. Number one, that India sticks to the One China policy, especially on Taiwan. They didn't mention much about Tibet at that time, but they mentioned about Taiwan, no diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Number two is the Indian government officials should not say China is a threat. And so we tweaked our documents, official documents. And George Fernandez was the only one who mentioned about that in after the nuclear tests in 1998. The third condition is the Indian media is negative towards China, and you need to muzzle the Indian press. So India accepted the first two conditions, but not the third one on the media. So when you're saying resetting the bilateral relations, we need to go back to these 1950, 54, 76 positions and see whether we can do the resetting. And China has already done the resetting by first agreeing to peaceful resolution of the territorial dispute and having agreements in 93, 96, 2003, 2012, and so on, but mobilizing forces in contrary to the agreements. So China had already tweaked its India policy. So it's tempting for India also to tweak the China policy in the longer term. I think we are at the crossroads in the bilateral relations as the soldiers are eyeball to eyeball with the Chinese side, which then suggests that this is the time for us to reset the bilateral relations. Of course, the India cannot completely go away from China. We did follow an engagement policy with China since 1950, but that has not yielded results, positive results. On the other hand, we had 20 Indian soldiers killed. So it's time for us to look at these. If the Chinese response is, at the moment, it is negative, we have to see, of course, the Chinese response as well. So we did follow a controlled engagement policy with China, but it did not result in positive aspects for India, except in few areas. But we cannot also ignore China completely. So it is not a containment of China policy, although China did follow some containment of India policy in its 7 decades of interactions. Nevertheless, India still should follow an engagement policy with China, taking into consideration the previous experience that it had not yielded much positive, but still we need to probe this aspect.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for the fascinating talk. We really learned a lot on the present status of China-India relations and what is happening at the LSE during this interaction. So it was really great having you with us today. We will keep tracking you, tracking your researches, your publications to know more about China-India. So thank you once again and have a great day, sir. Bye,
Thank
sir.
You. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And there is a say that there is no better time than now for learning, especially from Kondapalli sir, on this kind of topics. And thank you so much, sir, for insightful session. And thank you, Antara, for keeping it much more interactive and for your time as well. And thank you all of you for joining us today, Saturday morning. Have a good weekend ahead. And thank you so much.
Bye. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a good weekend.